Hey, everybody. 2, 3, 4. Do 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 do. Beep bop bop beep bop bop. Stee beep bop 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 bop. It's hey. Oh, sorry, I should hold that up. Let's get this to be the thumbnail. As if I hold this here long enough, maybe YouTube will get okay. And now it's time for Pics of the Week. Oh goodness. Okay. So not the hugest week this week, and nothing of well, there was nothing this week. There was not any, it's just more Marvel stuff I got here basically. So, oh no, what a horrible thing! First up is Marauders number 27. This I'm pretty sure is the final issue since it's 4.99 and it feels like it's a little bit thicker. And I've been kind of saying this for a while now, and I need to stop because I have exactly zero evidence of this. It's more just a gut feeling, which, what am I? A 30-year detective? Uh, but a lot of the Jonathan Hickman X-Men books are feel like they're winding down. And Hellions already ended, and I feel like Excalibur is getting near the end also. Children of the Atom didn't last but 5 issues. That might have been intentional, but what I've noticed is that X Factor also ended. So what happened, like with X Factor, for example, X Factor was going along. X Factor wasn't even one of the first. X Factor was kind of like second wave. Marauders is one of the first. That's why it's all the way up to 27. I don't think X Factor made it past 12. And then they had a final issue of X Factor, and then they had the Trial of Magneto miniseries. And X Factor figured largely into that. And Teenie Howard, who wrote X Factor, I'm pretty sure it was Teenie Howard or Vita Ayala, one or the other, wrote Trial of Magneto. And so, and I think there was a similar thing with uh, there was another one that just did that. Did Hellions have a thing? I don't know. So I feel like what they're doing with the X titles, which I think is great, and it's not something I can recall ever having seen before, is when a book starts to tank, they cancel it, but they give the book its own, either like a big finale like Hellions got, or like kind of a mini series to wrap up a lot of loose ends, like with X Factor. So, yeah, I got no problem with it. That's the other thing too, is because the way comics are these days, nothing. I mean, for a book to last 2 years, it's about right. I mean, it's so silly. But even like the big titles, like Avengers and Thor and X Men, they all start over all the time. I mean, X Men's got to be on volume 8 or 9 by now, and that's not even Uncanny X Men. I digress. Anyway, I've been really enjoying this. It's a Jerry Duggan is a very he's been a one of Marvel's top tier writers for the last several years, and he's kind of in the same class with like Jason Aaron, who's still going strong on Avengers too. But like a lot of the hot shots I feel that were around when Duggan started, and now I can't pick any of those names out, have either moved on or are still going at Marvel. But yeah, this has been a fun book. It's got Kitty Pryde as the leader of this team, and I don't know, I've just been enjoying it. And I'm kind of curious to see how they wrap it up. Also, this week I got Daredevil Woman Without Fear #1. So, in the Daredevil run that Chip Zdarsky, who also wrote this, at a certain point, Matt Murdock, as Daredevil, went to prison for murder. I mean, it was circumstantial, but it was still a, a kid was killed in the commission of Daredevil committing the crime of vigilantism, and so he got tried. I don't remember what they call that rule or that law. Um, Acting in concert, I guess, and he went to jail. So while he was in jail, Elektra put on the costume. As you can see, she added a kicky scarf and these two sighs. And now that the Devil's Reign event is underway, this is one of the tie-ins. There's another one with Doctor Octopus this week that I'm also I'm also looking forward to reading. But yes, this is another number one. I just thought I'd share that with you all for a little segment I like to call Pics of the Week. And now Pics of ba-ba-ba-doo-ba-da. I have got such a headache, so I am looking to get this done. Yes. So this past week, first up, I read the finale of Marjorie Finnegan Temporal Criminal, and this was great. I felt like I was kind of damning it with faint praise a little bit last week, but Garth Ennis is one of my favorite writers. Is my favorite comic book writer, and probably always will be. He mostly does war books. Like I think if you look at everything he's done since The Boys, say, which ended in when did The Boys end? 2011, I want to say, somewhere in there. He has not done a big long monthly title since The Boys. No. And I have a feeling he probably won't. I mean, if he gets a wild hair, he will, but he has not done a monthly since The Boys, to my knowledge. And so these sorts of shorter series are what we get now, and I'm totally fine with it. This is a lot of fun, a lot of very Ennis-y stuff. The devil's in it a lot. A lot of anti-religion sentiment, and a lot of cursing and fucking. So, what more do you want? But yeah, it's really fun, and I hope he does more. I certainly don't see why he wouldn't. Also from AWA, I read The Fourth Man #1. This was really good. I looked up Jeff McComsey, and I had not read anything else he'd done. Some of the stuff he has done looked familiar. Deodato is as incredible as always, but yeah, this is a murder mystery sort of crime story told from. There's 3 different murders that have happened, and they're all apparently interconnected, and we find out our first victim, we see his past, and very, very, very clearly based on Paul Giamatti, who is one of my favorite actors and should be in every comic book as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, it's real good, hard-boiled noir shit. It takes place in the early 90s, which is always fun. I mean, it wasn't fun to live through them. But ever since The Big Lebowski was set in the early 90s, I always feel it's a good time to set a story. I enjoy it. It's also because I think especially with crime and noir stuff, that's the last time you can set it before everyone had cell phones. You know what I mean? So that almost always seems to be one of the reasons. And then of course I read Barbaric 2 and 3. These were incredible. This series is so really, really good. And I even went so far as to email Michael Moreci, who I mentioned the first time, and I think I've read some of his stuff, but this is the first thing I've really seen that made me take notice of him. And I emailed him really just a real quick note. I think the subject line was just "Barbaric fucking rules," and the body was just "That's all." Looking forward to more. And he was really cool. He wrote back and he was like, "Hey, thank you." He said something to the effect of, "You don't get a lot of positive feedback these days." So I was like, "Oh yeah, well I'm happy to be that because I'm not very positive unless it's about a funny book." And he said that more is on the way. So I'm very, very much looking forward to that. So those were what I showed you. So let's see, what else did I... Oh, right, of course. I read these. 4 fucking volumes of Cerebus. Now, I mean, I know this looks like a lot. And it was. I spent a lot of time at home this week because there's a surge going on out there. I don't know if you're aware of that. But, I mean, this thickest volume probably was the quickest to read. This is the second quarter of Cerebus. This is, yeah. Is that right? From issue 50, well, 52 up to 150. Yeah. No, that's the. I can't do math. But I am now officially halfway through Cerebus, and I'm loving it more than I ever did. I've realized something which isn't a huge revelation, but I started reading this comic book right at this point, at 150, I think, or 152 might have been the first issue I bought. And not only did I have no idea what was going on, I didn't, because I was in the exact middle of this 300 issue series, which, by the way, even in the phone books, there's no recap or there's none of that. And in the story itself, none of that. And these last two, in fact, read pretty much like novels. Like this time through, I've been like we're reading the phone books, so I've been the covers aren't in here. So I've been just every time I finish an issue, I'll go back and look at the cover online for the next issue. But with Jocko Story and Melmoth, I had to count pages because the way he wrote it, and this is very much on purpose, was that there were no breaks in between issues. Um, if you were paying attention, and I was, you could kind of tell, oh, this must be a break. But mostly, it's always 20 pages. Each issue is 20 pages. So I just had to kind of count them, and I'm glad I did. So I'm sure I had mentioned last week or last time was Church and State was the third story arc, and this is the first 25 issues of Cerebus is just pretty much a straight up Conan parody, specifically of the Barry Windsor Smith Conan. And then the second arc, issues 26 through 50 is, or 51, is High Society. And that's the arc in which Cerebus becomes Prime Minister of Yest, which is the largest city state in Estarcion, which is the name of this world. It's essentially, it is basically, and Church and State makes this clear that Cerebus takes place thousands of years ago. The year is like 1415 in the book, but at the end of Church and State, oh guys, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So after he becomes prime minister, and he's drummed out of office, and it's a really fun political, very Veep-y, and maybe not quite as fast paced, but still burns through it. So then in Church and State, Cerebus leaves EST. He's done with everything, all this crap. But then he kind of gets roped back into being prime minister again, and then from there he becomes pope. And the Church of Tarim, which is the main like kind of the Catholic / Christian analogous church in this world, they appoint him pope in an effort to sort of control politically because he was the former prime minister. But what Cerebus does instead is he demands that everybody give him all the citizens give him all of their gold, or Tarim is going to destroy the world. And in the course of this, it starts to actually become like people are really pissed at him at first, and then they're like, "You're actually going to destroy the world if you keep doing this." And Cerebus is just like, "I just wanted everyone's gold." At the end of Church and State, he ends up on the moon. He ascends to what is thought of as heaven. It gets very complicated, spiritually speaking. The story is so difficult to follow. It was very difficult. That's what I'm saying, is that I read these when I was in high school. I went back and I read them, and it did make things made more sense, but it was still very confusing. But this read through, I'm 30 years older and better at reading. I'm smarter. And I also have the internet. So occasionally I have to look. There's one, and I think I'm going to ask him. I think I'm going to write a letter to Dave. There's one character, I think it's in the first Church and State. I'll have to go back and look for it. But one character who I recognize, but I couldn't pull the name, and I couldn't find it, and I had no idea what issue it was in. So if I get to issue 300 and that's the only question I have, I'm gonna write Dave a letter. Dave doesn't have a computer, as far as I know. And then so at the end of Church and State, he comes back to Earth, and since none of the predictions that he made came true, the Church of he's he's now like essentially wanted, and the Cyranists have taken over ES, and the Cyranists are a hardcore matriarchal religion slash government. So it's pretty grim when he comes back for Jaka's story. So now Jaka's story, Jaka is Cerebus's true love. He met her very early on, and she was a dancer in a tavern. And very typical of comic books, he just falls madly in love with her because he's hammered and she's pretty. And then he forgets who she is. And then she comes back. She came back in high society, and they've had this will they, won't they thing going the whole time. When he returns to Earth, he finds Jaka has married a very nice man named Rick, and they are living in kind of there's a big mountain. So you have the upper city and the lower city, and they live on the mountain that separates the two. And Jaka is dancing in a tavern across from where she lives, which is illegal under Cyranus law. But since they're way up on the mountain, nobody really notices. And then we're introduced to so Cerebus goes into hiding with her. He's still in love with her, even though she's married. And we're also introduced to Oscar, who is essentially an Oscar Wilde um, character. And so the story is intercut with like a novel of Jaka, like her growing up. And it's really good stuff. This is like the first book where there starts to be more texty parts, thusly. And I remember as a teenager, when I first read this, I read it word for word, and then when on subsequent rereads, I would skip over these parts because I just wanted to get to the funny comic parts. That story ends tragically and horribly, and Cerebus is in a state of shock all through this. This is a much shorter, as you can see, a much shorter story, and it always seemed to me, and I have no reason to think otherwise now, that as he was wrapping up Church and State, Dave was reading a lot of Oscar Wilde, hence why he created an Oscar Wilde character. That character, not to spoil anything, but that character is shuffled off, and then sort of, but not really, kind of comes back. And so basically, with Melmoth, he wanted to do a story that was the last days of Oscar Wilde. The Oscar character that we meet in Jaka's story is different from this Oscar Wilde character. And that's made clear to us in the beginning of Melmoth. And so, and it's really like it's not even fictionalized. He changes the names of places so that it's for this world, but the characters and the letters that they write and everything are all true to life. And I've read Oscar Wilde, but this is where I know most of my Oscar Wilde, especially from his final days. So Oscar Wilde, or Sebastian Melmoth, as the real Oscar Wilde went under after being released from prison, is dying in the hotel next to where Cerebus is now, just in a state of shock because I'm still trying not to give something away. At one point, towards the end of Jaka's story, Cerebus leaves because he feels like he's getting in between Jaka and her husband. When he comes back, they're gone, and he thinks she's dead. So he's just in a state of shock. And through this whole book, he's just sitting on the patio of the cafe next door to the hotel, holding Jaka's childhood doll and his sword. And the end of Melmoth, Oscar Wilde dies. I hope that's not a spoiler. And Cerebus finds out that Jaka is alive and proceeds to start murdering. And this is where I came in when I was a kid. So the next chapter is Flight, which Flight and then Women. Mothers and Daughters is the next arc, but that arc is divided into 4 different phone books. Flight, Women, Reads, and Minds. That's Mothers and Daughters. And then Reads especially is the third phone book. That's almost all text, and it was really unpopular. But I guess I'll get to that when I read that. So yeah, halfway through Cerebus. But I'm telling you, like you're arguing with me. I'm glad that I started reading Cerebus now. I've been kind of putting it off because I've been wanting to read it again. And like I've been saying, actually read it all the way through, which I've never actually done. I've read most of it, and most of it in mostly in order, but I've never actually sat and read all of it. And it is so good. And the weird thing is that I know, and so does the world, that Dave really went around the bend. And even back then, he wasn't thought of as being particularly progressive. But this work is extremely feminist and extremely critical of organized religion and extremely critical of um, everything. I don't know. It's like it's just weird, and I think he even recanted some of that stuff in the book itself later. And if I remember how the story with Cerebus and Jaka actually ends, I still don't like it. But I'm gonna reserve judgment. But I can say this: if any smartasses say to you, the first half of Cerebus is all you really need, they're not wrong. You could read the first half of Cerebus and be completely satisfied. I would say. I mean, it wouldn't be the ending wouldn't be satisfying, but if I remember correctly, it's more satisfying than the actual ending. But again, I'll withhold that until then. I'm just very excited. I really wish, like, I didn't mean to read all these, but I couldn't stop. They're so good, and the art is just unbelievable. I mean, just look at the cross hatching he does for this bottle of champagne. You can't really see it on the camera, but it's impressive. And now I'm gonna put these on my shelf, and I'm gonna love. I love how they're all gonna look on one shelf. Oh, it's great. Yeah, it's just my sort of thing. Well, what are you into? That's so great. Oh, a comic book nerd getting defensive. What are the odds? All right. Ugh, I'm gonna go to bed. Bye.